He calls 12 disciples to be with him. And then after that, he has an understanding of the Father's call, so there's strategy involved. There's a growing movement. There's 72 and then 120 on the day of Pentecost, so there's capacity building. And when he needs finance, he goes and gets it. And the church today so often reverses that. It says, if we're going to do anything, we need finance. Then we need strategy. Then we need to build team and capacity and resource. Then if we have time to think about it, we're going to think about building community and relationships and discipleship. And then we might invest spiritually in prayer and doing that. And I've been in the church system for so long that that is so often what people say. I say, I'd love to do something, but I've got no people, I've got no money, I've got no building. And I say, just start to pray and find the people God calls to you, and then start there, because that's all that Jesus did.
Welcome to our Dwellings podcast. We're here in London for the second leg of our cohort, and we're delighted to have again, as of last year as well, John McGinley and David Vincent. You're so welcome, and we've been so blessed by what you've shared already with us. And thank you for taking the time out to chat with us about a few things on our podcast that we know is going to really help people and bless them. So I just want to invite you to tell us a little bit about yourself, John and David, and what God's doing with you.
So I'm John McGinley, and I have been ordained in the Church of England for 30 years. I've led 3 church communities before starting Myriad, which helps ordinary people to start new church communities wherever God has put them to make new disciples of Jesus Christ. And we have a vision for thousands of these in the UK. We formed 4 years ago. We've trained just over 100 teams so far, but we're really learning, discovering what God's teaching the church in these new organic grassroots communities.
And I'm David Vincent, and I work with John with Myriad. Most of my life I've been a geography teacher and teaching teenagers in a local school. And alongside that, leading prayer based in North London. So that kind of interface between prayer and places and land I'm really interested in. And then got involved with just seeing people working on estates and some of the mission activity in London. I'm just aware that we have a kind of like a culture now where the church is starting to think about outside of the building. It's moved outside of the building. But when we talk about prayer, we often gather to the building. And so there's this gap between where's the prayer and where's the mission happening. And I wanted to close that. And so out of that, really working in the place of prayer to support church planting, to support what God is doing more widely. And that's how I got involved in Myriad. And also oversee a house in North London called St. Peter's Bourne, which is part of the 24/7 prayer, wider prayer communities that has a rhythm of prayer and about 20 people living in the house there.
Wow, that's incredible. And you've both been involved in the Send as well. Tell us a little bit.
Yep. So the Send is to mobilize those who are already Christians in that generation of 16 to 25-year-olds to really live all in for Jesus and to go wherever he sends them on mission. And so over the last couple of years in the UK and Ireland, we have seen over 20,000 people engage with the Send. We've called them to identify their missional calling, and then we've sought to equip them. We're encouraging them to be in little communities, spot fire communities as we call them, to fire them up, to continue to live missionally wherever they are, and then to step into that call. And I've been leading that, and David's been on the team leading prayer.
And I think one of the things, we see what the new things that God is doing, but also there's very much, even with the Send, it was an echo of trying to pick up what we know God has said and what he's done in the past. And so one of the big aspects of the prayer for the Send was, Lord, do it again. We're not asking you to repeat what you've done before, but we recognize by looking at what you've done in the past that you are still wanting to rewrite our story. And so even as the Send and with Myriad emerges as new things God is doing, there's a sense of where do we find that in the promises that God is waiting to see fully fulfilled, but also learning from the places of history as well.
Awesome. Dwellings, our vision statement is to help people cultivate communities around the presence of Jesus. And I know that's what you're doing in Myriad in particular. Can you, in everything that you're involved in, can you tell us what you see God doing in the UK, particularly in the smaller communities, house churches, etc.?
I think what I'm noticing is that there is a shift in the understanding for the need for this. I think post-COVID, people realised that the pattern of church had not actually formed them into disciples who could live out their faith just in relationship with one another. They were still very dependent on the programme of the church, which delivered their faith, as it were, for them. And then they realised the bankruptcy of some of that, and so they began to look for, how do I live this out in my life? And they're looking for communities, authentic communities, that will allow them to do that. I think that church leaders are moving from a sense of this feels like a threat to, yes, I agree that that can be something God calls people into, but we're still at the point of saying, how does that work? What does that look like? Can this really be the heart of what God's doing at this time with his church? So there is still a question mark over it in the UK. And so we feel that we're in a transition time where we're pioneering this work. We're convinced that whenever God moves afresh, he always moves, it's two aspects. So quite often he moves in a younger generation, and he moves by forming new communities of faith that have a radical and distinctive nature that prioritizes disciple making, communities that love one another and really seek to make new disciples. So I think, we're in a transition time. And so we're seeing some movement, but there's lots of challenges.
I think, you picked up on the change that's happened post-COVID. I think one of the things also was that people got far more connected with their local space. And I think talking about the prayer in London as a whole, there was lots of prayer gatherings that were happening, and then immediately afterwards there was nothing, because people just like, actually, I found my place. I want to pray more locally. And so it was much more of a local embedded. Now, there's a movement for wider prayer gatherings again, but even there, that's come with a greater sense of being grounded within the geography. And I think, when we talk about some of the church planting and the growth of what's happening in new communities, historically that's always been through quite activist, missional pioneers who want to do something within the community because they want to set up food banks or do sort of social work as a means to bring the gospel. But I think people are now much more aware that they are present with God in their community. And so I think one of the things I'm observing is that people are praying for their streets, praying for their neighborhoods. And so although out of that then there's a growth of you discover the heart of God, and then you discover something for a missional call to that community because you've connected with God for the place. But there's another pathway that leads us into new communities that are being formed, which is not just through the activism, but also through being the prayerful presence in a place as well.
Yeah. I must say, one of the things that inspire me most is hearing stories of what God is doing. And I remember when I heard you, John, in relation to the Send, I think it might have been in Dublin, you told a story about a kid who came to faith. He had no interest in God and ordered a Bible, and then he ordered a box with Bibles. Yeah. I mean, give us a couple of stories. I mean, some of us have read the Quiet Revival report, and that term is being used, but God is doing something. There's definitely something happening. Give us a couple of inspiring stories that will just increase our faith.
Yeah, so a local church who had a young adults and youth worker who was basically ready to give up because he'd seen no fruit at all. So it's important to hear that as the background. And then a young man who was playing centre forward for the local semi-professional football team just came to faith on TikTok, reading his Bible, encountering Jesus, walks into church. He brings a friend. That friend had been prayed for by a Christian young woman in that church. And so she then sees what God's doing. She invites some other friends. Then another guy who was a roofer and did some repair work on the vicarage experiences the presence of God in this building, goes, what was that? He's told, you've experienced the Holy Spirit. He comes into church, and suddenly there's a group of 10 young adults. And what this church does is so simple. They invite them to a Bible study group that some retired guys are running. And they join it and they love it. It feels like family. And then out of that, they start to grow in faith. But what these older guys don't know how to do is to say, now go on mission. But these younger guys just intuitively go, we want to see others come to know Jesus, because they're so transformed and are so excited about this. So they form their own community. In addition to that, they start to read the Bible together, and they invite their friends to come, and they do the lesson that the old guys have taught them the week before. And then they have another time of prayer together. And suddenly the church leaders have discovered they formed a community of about 15 young adults who are seeing people come to faith, who are pursuing Jesus. And they're realizing, actually, this is what church looks like. And they're sharing lives, they're encouraging one another, they're posting their testimonies online. And it has the marks of what God's doing. I don't like the term quiet revival. I think these are the first fruits of the revival that are coming, but they are definitely distinctly different. That church could never have dreamt of this. And they are signs of the Spirit supernaturally encountering people before they've even been witnessed to. They're people who come in and become passionate about Jesus immediately. They want to engage spiritually, and then they want to actually see others come to know Jesus, and they're on mission right at the beginning. And so these are some of the marks of what we're seeing God do in this younger generation. They need the older generation. And so this is the really important message that we're communicating, which is it's both and. But we need to release them, not try to subsume them into our pattern of church. So that's something what we're seeing. I don't know if you want to tell a story or if you want me to tell another one.
I said something about prayer walking, some of that. So I think, again, if people are, how do I really engage with my place with God? And one of the easy ways for people to do that is just to prayer walk. And so last year we launched a bit of a digital app so people can literally just walk their patch. So whatever field is their street or wherever they're walking. And as they do that, they mark that as an area that they've walked, and other people do that as well. And then so the church together can really pray for a space. Yeah. And over London, we saw over 3,000 kilometres of prayer walking that happened just in over a month. Just as people are engaging with their places and really wanting to bring God's presence into their everyday lives. There's still challenge and struggle in that, but actually the places of prayerful encounter for non-Christians is also something else that's happening. So one of our communities is just regularly inviting the local stage just to pass prayers, and they have this tree where they can go, and they just have this place. And on this tree, they can just leave a little prayer note. And then the people leading that church go and pick it up and they can pray for. And out of that, there's this sense of there's a place of pilgrimage that was made in their local estate, just as a place where people can go and pray. And then as of that, people then open to God. So when they then do a Christmas service, they've got 170 people who turn up at the local community centre because people are thinking about God, they're engaging with God, and they're being invited into that space in their everyday lives.
Yeah. And presence is the center of all of this. That's why prayer preempts everything that you're doing.
Yeah.
You threw out a statistic earlier about the people that are coming to Jesus. What percent had a supernatural experience or encounter with God? What was that?
Yeah, so there's a study that was done by Fusion, which is a student movement, and they estimate that 25% of people who are coming to faith in that Gen Z age profile come just through a supernatural encounter with God. So they've had a dream, they've been prayed for by somebody, they've had a sense of God just drawing them to himself. And so the difference that makes is that the church's job is then to help them understand that, rather than work out how to persuade them that God is real. Just one little great story. Young person has a dream in the night in which Jesus comes and tells her that she must read the Bible, and he gives her a passage that she must read. She wakes up in the morning in the fear of the Lord, going, I don't have a Bible, turns on her light, and on her bedstand is a physical Bible open at that passage. She goes into school, finds the one Christian that she knows and says, what does this mean? And at the same time, their other best friend said, I had a dream last night and a figure in white appeared to me and said to me to follow him. Now,
And sorry, where is this happening?
This happened in Oxford, in the UK.
This century.
2025, just before Christmas. And it's happening to ordinary British people. It's not just the people who are more spiritually open from other cultures. This is what God is doing.
So I lead a prayer house in North London, as said, and our cleaner we employed to come into the house. She came and spoke to me, and she said, what is that place? What do you kind of do there? Because ever since I've started working for you, I'm having night visions. Or she didn't use that language, but she said, I'm lying in bed and I see this face on the ceiling of this person who's looking at me. She says, and I just cry. And it's not like sad, it's like it's a happy kind of tears, because I just feel so at home and overwhelmed. Can you explain what's happening? So able to introduce her to Jesus, and out of that experience or this encounter, by being in a place of presence, God just met with her in her every day.
And it's like the Acts of the Apostles, really, isn't it, for today?
It is.
It's incredible.
It is.
Well, I want to just shift a little bit. I could listen to those stories all day, and I think probably others could, but some people who are listening are maybe trying to pioneer a community in their home. Some people are doing it in a workplace or a gym or school. And it's not the easiest thing to do at times. And there's some stats that are around, that the average house church maybe has a shelf life of 3 to 4 years. That could be what God wants, maybe, in certain circumstances. So we're not decrying the value of a short life for a house church. But I think most people would like to see longer than that, or like to see more of an impact. I think there was a statistic you used, only 18% of churches are still there, pioneer churches, after 4 years. But you also alluded to the fact that doesn't have to be the case, and you're seeing stats that are more healthy than that, especially through Murray and David. Can you tell us what the differences are there? What makes the difference? What you've seen makes the difference?
So the research that we did, we helped in the launch of Myriad, the key factor that we identified was having somebody to champion and to walk with the person. Okay. And so somebody who's got a mentoring experience, who's walking with them, is able to be there with them. What we do within Myriad is we create a learning community. So that even an individual planting team isn't doing it on their own, but they're doing it with others who are in a similar situation. And my particular role there is looking at how we develop prayer. So there's, what are the prayer steps that we need people to understand? And there's an aspect of it where when you start a church, you are making a declaration of the kingdom is here, which is going to attract attention. So how do we not only develop the prayerfulness that is around our communion and abiding with God, but also we understanding the other aspect of prayer that Jesus talks about praying for his kingdom to come and exercising authority. So there's those two aspects that we do in the development. And so when we have teams where things have been very challenging for them, it's how do we bring the prayer support for them, individual words and speaking into their situation that can sometimes unlock things for them. But also we've had, church plants where people then have gone to, prayer walked with them, spent time with their team, and we have a prayer champion in every one of the hubs that we have. There's somebody who's facilitating the prayerful support for these pioneer missioners in doing what they're doing. So there's something of we talk like it's an incubator. We want to create this environment where growth happens. And so how do we create that environment, not just for missional and discipleship, but also for something of the sustaining presence of God? When my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that's higher than I. So how do we keep people back into that routine of processing with God what they need to do in order that they can find the ability to renew their strength and move on for another day?
And hearing some of those stories and testimonies, very romantic, very inspiring, but it's not easy work. And it can be messy, can't it?
It really can. And I think that the reason that we journey for 2.5 years with these teams in our Myriad pathway is because we need to support them over that long term, because it isn't straightforward. And there are so many different factors involved in building team, in learning how to reach your community, in learning how to be a discipling community, a formational place in which the presence of God comes and transforms people, in which you're on mission together. We were talking earlier about how do you relate to the established church, and how do you receive the resource and support, and yet how do you get released, and how do you form good relationships into that space? All of that is incredibly complex. And so that's why Dwellings is so important. That's why we believe Myriad is so important, because people need support to do this. But Jesus always moves in this way. And so in this transitional space, when we don't think we've created the perfect product yet, but we are committed to helping people who he's calling to pioneer, to go first in this journey of re-understanding church as just a community of followers of Jesus at their heart, just as you define Dwellings, and creating that presence and then having that missional purpose.
And I like what you said about partnership even with the traditional church, because sometimes pioneer movements, house church movements in particular, can be quite critical of the trad church, traditional heritage church, but the sweet spot is everybody working together and seeing the benefit of cooperation.
And I think that the established churches, they have to be renewed. They have to rediscover their missional purpose. And one of my sort of little images is of the established church as a harbour, which little boats can flow in and out of. The danger is that established church, first of all, doesn't release the little boats, doesn't equip and doesn't send. And secondly, just constantly tries to draw them back in as if that's where they should be, in the harbour. But actually, Jesus is sending people out onto the seas to rescue people. And so he's trying to get that sweet spot. And the established church needs renewing, and we need to learn how to be in relationship with it in those smaller communities.
And there's something also coming back into the harbour that enriches the harbour as all the fish are unloaded.
Yeah.
That the established church goes, wow, and it allows people's vision and perspective to be challenged, even for people who don't feel any call into those small little churches. But there's something of that interaction that is not just a blessing for the smaller churches, but it helps with the renewal and the reframing for the larger churches.
So good. There's something you said earlier around the model Jesus used and what he invested in, as opposed to what sometimes the church invests in, it almost as a reversal.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate? Both of you talk about that for a while.
I'll share the framework, and then David can talk about the heart of what Jesus did, because it's so interesting in what Jesus does is that he turns up on this earth and he begins his ministry by fasting for 40 days. So it's an absolute spiritual investment, nothing else. Incredibly weakened physically and isolated from every other influence. But that's where he wins those battles to begin with. Then he invests relationally. He calls 12 disciples to be with him. And then after that, he has an understanding of the Father's call, so there's strategy involved. There's a growing movement. There's 72 and then 120 on the day of Pentecost, so there's capacity building. And when he needs finance, he goes and gets it from all those different places that it comes from. But the church today so often reverses that. It says, if we're going to do anything, we need finance. Then we need strategy. Then we need to build team and capacity and resource. Then if we have time to think about it, we're going to think about building community and relationships and discipleship. And then we might invest spiritually in prayer and doing that. And genuinely, I've been in the church system for so long that that is so often what people say. I say, I'd love to do something, but I've got no people, I've got no money, I've got no building. And I say, just start to pray and find the people God calls to you, and then start there, because that's all that Jesus did. But we're in this mindset. And that capacity to believe that if you'll gather a few people together to start to worship and pray, that could change the world, is the mindset that is right at the heart of what we are believing for.
And I think that place of presence where you encounter God together is kind of the shaping of the place of discernment. Because I think, we're in a landscape where it feels like, it's almost like after a wildfire. All the landmarks have seemed to have disappeared. What was even the familiar street and the path that we used to walk down has now just been sort of shrouded in smoke. It's just like, which way do we go? And there's something about that, which is because the fire of God is coming to his church. And actually, as part of that, dead wood is burning. And the view that we had of perspective is now much shorter. Whereas before we would, as a leadership, we would go, okay, so what do I need to hear God for? I would have God's spoken to me. I've got this idea and I've really heard God. I would go away. I would formulate my plan, my strategy, find the resources from that, and I would run with that. 2-3 years later, that's gone really well, or, we've worked it out, and then I'll go back to God and go, okay, what next? Whereas that's just been completely ripped up, it feels. It's that God is saying, I want a dependence upon me, which is daily. I want a strategy upon me, which is daily. I don't want you to receive from me and think that's manna that's going to sustain you for weeks or months with a strategy of this is how you can now do it. The new way of doing it is just like lean on me. So it's like, okay, what are you going to do today? Because it might be different from what you did last week. So that ability to hear God, not just for yourself, but also as a team together to learn how to discern where are we being led to go. So, okay, we tried this. It really didn't work. Okay, God, what do we do next? Because we're not here because we've got a particular plan. We're here just because we want to do what you want us to do. So that constant dependence, I think, is something that the church is being brought back into in a new way.
Yeah. I could talk to you two guys for a long, long time. And I just want to thank you for not just your time today, but for your insights and wisdom, apostolic and prophetic wisdom around what God is doing and inspiring us in the hardness and the challenges of that pioneer type ministry, but also being here in the UK, which is where home for me, and pioneering and leading and inspiring us to keep going. And we've learned from you in Dwellings a lot, and we bless you and bless Myriad and bless the Send and everything that you're involved in. Maybe I could just pray before we close out. Lord, thank you that you're at work in your world. Thank you for these stories of your moving. And Lord, I guess my takeaway today is except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. And these stories that we're hearing are things we've dreamt of for years. I read about them as a child in centuries gone by. But when we see it breaking forth, we're always looking for patterns, we're looking for models and formula. But Lord, ultimately, we can have the models, the patterns, the formula, and not have your presence. And we're seeing that it's you, Lord. It's all about you. And Lord, we thank you for this reminder from John and David. And we bless them, and Myriad, Descend, and all that are involved in. And we're so excited to hear more stories of what you're going to do through them. In Jesus' name, amen.